I never imagined how intensely becoming an adult would feel. Having recently graduated at 24, I was eager to at last escape the drudgery of late-night study and ramen dinners. My life had a roadmap. I secured an internship and dreamed of advancing my profession, ready to face the world. Everything was beginning to click. One day then, I opened an email from the bank. Only another standard alert, I thought. Not expecting very much, I clicked on it and stopped at one number. 150,000, is it? Not the kind of number you forget or find simple reading. Hoping it was an error or my mind fooling me, I scrolled back up, down, and back again. But there it was. I owed $150,000. A debt whose calculations clearly made no sense at all. Even without subsidies, my tuition would have just barely been $70,000. The partial scholarship and part-time cafe work helped me to keep my expenses under control. Panic swelled up. There was no circumstance in which I should be staring at a figure that enormous. I felt caught in some sort of fever dream in which reality was changing on me. I panicked, trying to figure out how I could be so deep in debt. Has there been an error? A system error? Desperate, I picked up my parents. My throat tightened even more when my mother picked up her normal distracted, "Hi, honey." I described the circumstances and pushed my voice to remain calm, even as my hands began to sweat. She reassured me it was a straightforward mix-up. The bank most likely made a clerical mistake, and we will have it corrected. But her voice revealed a change, a pause that made me uncomfortable. "Mom, this isn't just a mix-up. I owe $150,000 per the statement. That is double my tuition." I pushed, desperation tumbling into my voice, then silence on the other side. The type that announces the storm is just about here. "Well, we took out the full amount just in case to cover anything unexpected," she added. Anything unexpected? The phrase did not fit. Another stop. It bit at me, refusing to lie still in my head. "Your brother needed some help too." I swear my brain blanked for a second, an automatic safety mechanism to shut out the shock. Nate, my older brother who has been in and out of several businesses, never settled down. Nate had not gone to college, but had remained busy attempting to enter the music business or whatever piqued his attention right now. And they had borrowed money in my name for him? I kept my voice low and steady. "How much did you hand him?" I hung up, my hands cold and shivering. She started, but I wasn't interested in the explanations. Not anymore. I replied, "I'm coming over," cutting her off before she could search for words that wouldn't relieve the pounding in my skull. Sitting in my peaceful apartment, the sounds of the city outside poured through the windows. By the time I got to their house, I felt the weight of all I had created. The sacrifices, the late nights, the innumerable hours I worked to survive, being washed away. Their house was exactly as it had always been, with cozy, friendly nooks. But right now it seemed alien, like entering a narrative once mine that was no more. Neither wanting to start, they were both seated in the living room, already understanding why I was there. "Why?" I asked, not thinking through politeness. While my mom just looked fatigued, my dad looked at me with a mix of shame and sternness. "We thought we could handle it." My dad started, his voice quiet but firm. "That we would assist him get back on his feet? By getting out a loan in my name? Without even approaching me?" "Alex, we always try to do what's best for the family," my mom said. But the word family suddenly felt like it didn't include me. My voice cracked, and I hated that. On their balance sheet, I was a line item representing a resource. The space felt confined, as though the walls were slanted in. "You always attempt to do what's best for the family?" I sat back, forcing my breath to settle, but the buzzing in my mind was unrelenting. I kept going, stifling the want to yell. You not consider telling me? Before you put anything on me, could you kindly ask me? Having worked so hard to get here, I now have to cope with debt I did not agree to." My dad's voice grew defensive and his expression stiffened. "Alex, Nate needs a break. He was struggling and our names were not able to have a loan granted. We would handle your credit, it was superior. We believed you wouldn't even know about it until we had it handled." "But you didn't handle it," I said. "I'm learning now since the bank reports I owe $150,000. While Nate is still making decisions, I am the one footing the bill." "Just what? living lighthearted. My mother tried to calm things. Her voice was gentle but empty. I could hear my heart thudding in my chest, every beat louder than the last. Honey, you have to realize that Nate is different. He required assistance more than you could offer. You have always been sensible and independent. I had a twisted feeling of irony fill me. We believed you would be able to weather this better. So, because I'm responsible, I get penalized for it? That is your line of reasoning. With a set jaw, my dad leaned forward. This is not a kind of retribution. That is what families do. We rely on one another. Help? I laughed, the sound harsh and unpleasant. This is treachery, it is not aid. You never considered the implications for me. When I have to start reimbursing this, what happens? Can I simply absorb this kind of debt and be all right? The room went quiet, loaded with unspoken words. My parents exchanged a glance that suggested guilt and something else, probably defeat. For myself, though, there was no solace in it. Finally, my mother broke the stillness. I felt as though the earth had been pulled from under my feet and that I was left flinging in freefall. She continued, voice faltering. We'll find a way to pay it back. Time? It will take time, but we will make it right. The stress too great to bear sitting down. I got up. Time is not what I have, Mom. The bank has already emailed me the letter. Real and happening right now is this. Nate entered the room unaware of the storm building. Sensing the mood, he turned first to gaze at our parents, then back at me. What is going on? He asked, voice calm, like he had simply stumbled into a dull discussion on dinner arrangements. I turned to him, rage spilling over. You want to know what is happening? Nate, you are what is happening. He gazed at me, blinking like he couldn't understand the words. The debt they took out in my name to meet your expenses is now my burden and I'm drowning. He laughed then, a brief, awkward sound. Scratching the back of his head, he muttered, I thought they were paying it off already. Surely it is what we agreed upon. I turned back. There was no consensus. Never asked was me. They simply did it. A flutter of shame passed across his cheeks but disappeared as fast as it seemed. Look, I never asked them to do it. Man, they just wanted to be of assistance. My dad got up ready to leap in, but I held out my hand instead of making this my issue. No, he should really hear this. Without thinking about where it came from, you grabbed that money and ran. Well, Nate, what do you suppose? I started it. He turned away, crossing his arms as though he were the one wronged, and now I am the one paying for your decisions. I'm trying, Alex, said, you believe I was looking for this? I laughed incredulously. Your desired outcome makes no difference. What counts is what you did and how it's impacting me today. All right, enough, my dad replied, his voice raised just enough to force silence. He groaned, looking instantly older and more depressed. We will work this out as a family. We always do. Do we not? My voice softer now. Tired, I asked. Or do we wish it would vanish until it becomes someone else's concern? I didn't wait for a response, as right now that is how it feels. Driven by tension and resentment, I felt a rush of nausea surge as the discussion circled back. The air outside seemed cold and biting, a sharp contrast to the stifling heat inside. I turned and left, shutting the door behind me harder than I meant. For a brief period, I stood on the porch, allowing the cold to sink in and ground me. Now it was abundantly evident that this was not a situation that would fix itself. Leaving my parents' house, I felt as though I was walking away from everything known into a tempest. I knew nothing about how to negotiate if I wanted to get through this. Though under that, there was something heavier. Betrayal, disappointment. The rage in me was a continuous throom. Back in my flat, I sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at my laptop, the kind that drags into your bones and remains there. I knew what I had to do, determine my choices, and whether there was any way I might combat this. One after the other, I opened browser tabs looking for answers concerning loan conflicts, unapproved debt, anything that would provide some hope. Reading more made it seem more intimidating. Though I forced myself to press on, the language was thick and full of legal jargon that whirled about my mind. Hours passed, the light lowering behind the blinds, creating shadows across my messy desk. I could no longer afford to be ignorant about this. Exhaustion crept in as I massaged my temples, but stopping right now was not possible. One piece drew my attention, something on contesting loans taken out without informed permission. Though slim, it was nonetheless a possibility. I bookmarked it and carried on, taking notes and piecing together what felt like the beginning of a strategy. A knock at my door shocked me out of reverie. I looked at the clock. 10 past. Nobody else was expected of me. Nate stood there, hands tucked in his pockets, looking less confident than usual when I opened the door. "Can we talk?" "Depends," I answered, crossing my arms, my eyes not really meeting hers. The resentment simmering since I left my parents' house erupted once more. I turned aside, though, allowing him in. His shoulders bowed. He passed me and settled on the couch. "I didn't know, Alex. Regarding the loan, that is mean. I contemplated. I'm not sure. I assumed they had some strategy in place to handle it." His voice was low and doubtful. "And that makes it better? That part of him I was used to seeing?" I answered, trying to keep my voice calm. "You never considered asking where the money was coming from or how they may be helping you?" He cast his hands down and twisted them together. I suppose I was not interested in learning. I was lost in everything, trying to find somewhere with the modeling events and make it work. It was simpler not to probe. "That's exactly the issue, Nate. Looking the other way, letting other people handle the aftermath has always been simpler for you," I added, rage running through every word. "Well, I cannot turn away from this. It is me caught with this. Not you." Silence hung between us, weighty and embarrassing. He moved and at last looked up at me. "Alex, I lack the means to pay you back. Though I wish I did, I do not." I felt sympathy, but I pushed it down. "I'm just getting by myself. I couldn't afford to let that in. Then our parents have to take the stage. This is not only on my plate to correct. They did this. They have to correct it." He nodded slowly, as though at last he understood the weight of it. "I'll talk to them," he answered, sounding demoralized. I wanted to believe him, even though I'm not sure what it will do. I hoped this talk would result in some sort of transformation, that he would stand up and assume some accountability. Deeply down, though, I knew better. After he went, I stood at the window, peering out at the city lights blinking far away. Nate's apologies had always been like sand, fleeting and insubstantial. The room seemed stiller than it had ever been. I had some of the rage out, but the tiredness persisted like an uninvited guest. The following morning, I called my parents. It rang a few times before my dad grabbed it. Like he had been up all night, his voice was harsh. "Alex," he began, not even trying to seem casual. "We need to talk," I added, cutting right past any politeness, "about the loan and about what comes next. This is not going to vanish just now." There was a long silence before a sigh. "Alex, we are working through things. It's complicated." "It's not complicated," I responded, my voice harder than I wanted. "We are going to have more trouble. Either you figure out a way to pay back what you owe or otherwise." The quiet on the other side was deafening. I have been investigating my alternatives and, should I have to, I am ready to file legal action. My dad's voice had changed, colder now when he spoke once more. "Would you truly go that far? Would you drag your own family before court?" "If it means defending myself, then yes," I said, heart thumping but firm. "I have done all I could to be responsible and keep above water, and today your decisions have me drowning." Indeed, I would. I could hear my mother in the distance mumbling something I couldn't make out. Though I felt the weight of it, I stood my position. "We'll talk," my dad replied at last, voice tense. 3 days, I responded. "Give us a few days." I hung up and laid the phone down, the quiet ringing in my ears. "Then I want to know what your plan is." Pushing them like that put them at risk, but I had few choices. This time I couldn't allow their shame or apologies to affect me. Though it meant standing alone, I had to get back under control. The next several days were a jumble of waiting and attempting to keep my internship focused. Work was meant to be my getaway, a place where I could ignore all else and concentrate on deadlines and chores. But with this weight hovering over my head, every moment seemed weighty, as though someone were pressing on my chest. It didn't endure, even if I managed to become lost in the rhythm of my work. My head would stray back to that figure, $150,000, sitting there like a boulder in the midst of my life. I kept my phone on my desk, screen up, almost expecting it to light up with a call or a text. Still, the quiet from my parents was louder than any words. Every hour that went by without hearing from them was like waiting for an unrealized storm. I was impatient by the time the third day arrived. That evening, just as I was ready to leave my office, my phone rang. I was Dad. I inhaled deeply and responded, preparing myself for whatever was ahead. "Alex, voice strained," he murmured. "We are going to try to reimburse you. We have discussed this. Though it won't be quick and it won't be simple, we will work it out." I closed my eyes, a tiny bit of me sensing the least flutter of comfort. Still, it wasn't sufficient. "Dad, what exactly does try mean? You really are serious about this?" I knew, and I could hear the tiredness in his voice. "You backing out after a few months or deciding it's too difficult?" "We are going to cut back on spending and start selling some items. Your mother is investigating covering extra shifts at her place of employment." I wanted to believe him, to let that be the end of it, but skepticism had taken root deep inside me. I needed more than promises this time. Trying to keep my voice calm, I continued, "I need a specific plan. You have a week to show me how you intend to start paying this back. Should you not be able, I will have to bring this before court." Before he answered, "All right," there was silence that seemed a little too long. 5 days. You will have your plan." When we hung up, I sat back in my chair and gazed up at the ceiling. It felt as though I had just completed a marathon without looking at a finish line. Doubt took center stage in the comfort I experienced. They had a week. I had to get ready for the possibility that nothing might come of it. The days passed gently, one merging into the next. Work, errands, and trying to concentrate on anything other than the ticking clock in my thoughts kept me occupied. Though I tried to make things regular when we spoke, my girlfriend Jenna sensed something was odd. One evening over dinner, she commented, "You've been quiet lately." Her eyes looked at me, concern written on her face. I tried a little smile. "Just focus on your work-related stress. It has been a lot." She stretched out and squeezed my hand. "Here you know, I am here, for anything you need." "I know," I murmured, squeezing back. And I did know as well. Though Jenna had been by my side through all, this was different. The week passed, and at last I received a text from my dad asking whether I could come over. This was not something I wanted to bring her into more than I already had. Driving to their house, my gut twisted, and every worst-case scenario played out in my thoughts. The same place that used to seem like home now seemed like the scene of some drawn-out conflict I was weary of fighting. They were waiting in the living room when I stepped in. My mother seemed pale, with red and puffy eyes. Hands clasped in front of him, my dad sat stiffly. "We put everything together," he added, pointing to the binder that lay on the coffee table. "We assumed these were part of their plan." Though his voice was tight, it also had a resigned quality. "This is how we're going to start paying it back," I said, as I sat down and grabbed the binder and turned through the pages. Lists of items they intended to sell, financial analyses, specifics of my mom's extra work hours at her company. It was more work than I had anticipated, and for a minute I felt a tiny, cautious hope blossom inside me. "This is a start," I remarked, looking up at them. "You must, however, keep to it. Should you cease, should this fall through, I would not hesitate to proceed with the case. Now I cannot gamble my future on half-promises." My mother nodded, tears running down her cheeks. "Alex, we are aware of. We know." The next several weeks were unusual. Initially modest, payments began to arrive consistently. For at least now, my folks were keeping up. I thought I was in flux, juggling cautious relief with wrath. Some of me wanted to think this was the turning point, that they would honor their word. But the other side, the one that recalled every excuse and failed promise, couldn't rest. Nate stayed quiet, most likely the best thing he had done in a long time. I saw him hardly at all, and when I did, it was only a cursory glance, a nod devoid of meaning. I have nothing against him avoiding me. Still, there was nothing to say. One evening, I received a text from my mother that startled me. You know, we are rather proud of you. Until recently, we just had no idea how much we were asking of you. I'm apologies. It was something, not much, and it changed nothing about what had transpired. I let myself relax a little bit for the first time in weeks. However, I knew this was just temporary. It was only the start of attempting to reconstruct my life free from historical drag-down. One step at a time, I was also ready for it. The first few payments arrived, and for the first time in a long time, I felt as though perhaps things could turn around. Every deposit was a little indication that perhaps, this time, they were sincere. I couldn't let my guard relax, though. Work started to seem a bit less like a weight bearing down on me and more like what it was meant to be, a place where I could push myself, learn, and truly love what I was doing. I knew how readily those promises could slip away. One day, my manager observed, "You seem more focused this week, Alex. Keep it up, whatever you are doing." I nodded and gave a little smile. Hearing that, like I was recovering a piece of myself I had lost over the past months, felt nice. But even with those little successes, I couldn't get rid of the impression that the peace was fleeting, like the eye of a hurricane. A few weeks later, Nate texted me, wondering whether we might meet. I was still getting ready for impact. I looked over the message and questioned whether it was worth it. I wanted to retain the gap I had created between us, to ignore him. But another side, the one that couldn't help but recall the years we were young children running tag in the backyard, said yes. We met a few blocks from my house at a coffee shop. It was neutral ground, where objects felt less weight. He looked different when he walked in, thinner, older, like the last few weeks had worn on him also. Fiddling with the sleeve of his jacket, he nodded at me, a tight smile on his face as he sat down. "Thanks for coming," he said. Typical of Nate, when things became tough, he avoided staring me in the eye. I waited. I did not answer. His court held the ball. "I know I've been absent," he began, stopping as he seemed to be looking for the appropriate language. "You stated something that has me considering duty and all that. As correct as true. I wasn't sure what I would have expected him to say, but it wasn't that. I missed asking questions when I should have." I nodded gently, allowing him to go on. "Alex, I don't have the money. Though I wish I did, I don't. However, I spoke with a friend in finance, and he believes I could be able to find a side job that would enable me to begin reimbursed payments. Though not much, it's something." His voice had a genuineness I hadn't heard in years. It brought hope, something I hadn't let myself feel for some time. "It's a start," I remarked, repeating what I had advised her parents. "Still, you have to carry through. This cannot be another thing you let slip." He met my eyes for the first time, a flutter of will visible there. "I know, and I am going to try. I owe you that much." The topic then turned to awkward small talk, neither of which we were very adept at. But that was only a start. When he departed, something felt a little lighter. Perhaps this time he intended it. Perhaps things would be different. Days became weeks, and the payments arrived slow but consistently. I watched and checked my calendar and account like clockwork. Nate texted news every now and then on his side gig and how it was doing while my parents were holding their end. One week, he even provided a meager payment, which startled me more than I would have liked to say. It wasn't much, but it was evidence that perhaps he was starting to take things seriously. One weekend, Jenna and I drove to the seaside, needing to get away from the continual cacophony of the city and the weight of everything on me. The sea air was clear, the sky a canvas of blue and soft gray where clouds sloppily floated. Sitting on a blanket, we watched the waves wash in and out. Jenna murmured, her voice calm but firm. "I'm proud of you, you know." She turned to face me, a little smile on her lips. I gazed at her, the gravity of her words setting in. Not just for handling all of this, but for not letting it change who you are. It was simple to forget the will it required to keep on, to avoid being resentful or letting rage rule all. "I'm trying," I said, and for the first time I thought that was accurate. The remainder of the day I laughed and talked about nothing and everything, letting the sound of the water drown out the noise in my thoughts. I was trying, not only to heal what was broken, but also to rebuild something better. The weeks after that were quieter. For a few hours, I felt free, like the version of myself I had almost forgotten existed. Payments arrived. The strain at home softened somewhat. Nate kept his word. Still, I knew more than to believe everything was resolved. My parents still lived far away, an invisible barrier we had not worked out how to penetrate. Then one evening, my dad called, not sure if we would ever. His voice had a distinct quality, hesitant but not defensively. "Alex, I wanted to let you know that I and your mother, we are sorry for everything, not only for the loan. We were wrong, not considering what it would mean for you. We understand it now. It was something, not the whole redemption arc I could have hoped for. An admission that I was not only their safety net or extension of their ideas." "Thank you," I murmured, exhaling the breath I had not realized I was holding. "That matters more than you know." The silence that followed this time was not unpleasant. It was the kind of quiet that suggested something fresh, a place where evolution might flourish. It was a place to start. After the call, I sat on my balcony as the city lights stretched out below me. It wouldn't solve everything or wipe the past. The air was cold, and road noise buzzed far away. I considered all that had happened: the hurt, the resentment, the small bits of optimism that had begun to resurface. It wasn't finished, and I still didn't know what the future would contain. But for the first time, that uncertainty didn't feel oppressive. It felt like possibilities. Life didn't suddenly change after that call from my dad, but it changed in a manner that counted. It seemed as though a bruise was beginning to fade, not gone, not forgotten, but just less stinging to the touch. Nate kept with his side gig, contributing what he could. The cash kept coming, sometimes a little late, but always arriving. Enough to keep things going, enough for me to breathe a bit easier. At work, I poured myself into projects, letting the consistent pace ground me. My supervisor brought up a forthcoming promotion, the prospect hanging like a promise of something firm and substantial. It was precisely the kind of news I needed, a reminder that the last few months of turmoil defined nothing about life. There were other components to it, ones I could create with my own hands. My relationship with Jenna developed as well. Her unflinching patience has been my lighthouse through all of this. She turned to me one evening as we sat on the couch with a movie running in background and asked, "What do you want to do next, Alex? Really do, I mean." The question knocked me off balance. My life had been essentially about surviving the next day, the next payment, the next tough talk for so long. Now, though, the idea of looking forward past the immediate felt fresh. "I don't know," I said, the response seeming both frightening and freeing. "Perhaps travel a little bit. View some locations I have not been." Her eyes brightened, and she leaned over to rest her head on my shoulder, beginning to save for something meaningful, like a house. "I like that," she remarked gently. "I think you deserve that." It was the kind of moment that made everything else feel a little less heavy, as if the burdens were starting to fall from my shoulders piece by piece. But even as things improved, there was always the problem of my parents. Though our connection was better than it had been in months, the rift still existed. Like a cracked vase, patched back together, it was serviceable but never exactly the same. They kept paying, each one a subtle acknowledgement of their responsibilities, but the talks we had were still cautious and circumspect, as if we were negotiating an unseen fault line. Then, one afternoon, my mom called and asked if I would come over for supper. I hesitated, my chest constricting at the thought of sitting at the same table where we had so many disagreements. But part of me knew that if there was ever going to be a road to real forgiveness, it had to start somewhere. Jenna came with me, her hand warm in mine as we ascended the familiar steps to my parents' house. Before we even knocked, my mother was standing there nervously, smiling from the door. With a wavering voice, she said, "Hi, honey." She turned to check Jenna and grinned broadly. Dinner was quiet at first. Jenna remarked, "Always nice, always the bridge when things felt too tight." "Hi, Jenna." "Hi, Mrs. Carter." The air was filled with the quiet hum of discussion about the weather and work, as well as the clinking of silverware. Then, though, my dad dropped his fork and cleared his throat. "Alex, I know we cannot undo what we have done. Still, we want you to know we are trying." I glanced at him, seeing the creases on his face that hadn't been there before, the way he seemed smaller, less sure. "And we're proud of you, for how you handled everything, even when we made it impossible." "We never meant to hurt you," my mother replied, her eyes glittering and her fingers shaking as she touched my hand across the table. "Yes, we did, and we really apologize for that." The words hung in the air, delicate and unvarnished. I did not know what to say for a split second. Still, I nodded slowly at last. Knowing is great. And I'm trying to go past it too. It wasn't totally forgiveness. Still, that was the first step. As the weeks passed, things improved. We sat there in the pleasant silence that followed, allowing it to settle about us like a ceasefire. Nate's donations, however little, were steady. My parents followed their payment schedule. I developed the ability to separate my wrath from their individual character. Though they were flawed and had screwed up, they were trying. One Saturday, I stood on the balcony of my apartment with Jenna, staring out over the city as the sun sank and there was space for understanding, even if trust would take more time to develop. Jenna replied, her voice gentle. "You did it, you know." The sky was painted with streaks of orange and pink, the kind of view that made everything else seem a bit less essential. "You came through this, stronger than before." I turned to her and felt her words weight down. She pointed out the right thing. It had not been simple, and I knew conflict still lay ahead. Times when the past would chew at the margins of my consciousness. I was not the same person I had been at the beginning of it all, though. I had maintained my ground, battled for my place, and discovered that I didn't have to carry everyone else's decisions as mine. I did, didn't I? We stayed there for some time, watching the city lights flutter one by one, the buzz of life continuing beneath our feet. The corners of my mouth lifted into a smile. It was not finished and not flawless, but it was mine, and for the first time in a very long time, it was sufficient.